raise your hand if you've ever sung along to the lyrics, "There won't be snow in Africa this Christmas." Well, Christmas Day in Africa looks very different depending on which country of the continent you're in, and I'm sure the residents of Ephraim in Morocco would disagree with this. And while snow will be falling in Ephraim, Algiers in Algeria will be experiencing milder winter temperatures with highs of around 12 degrees Celsius. Gisagara in Rwanda will be experiencing hot and humid weather, whilst Cape Town in South Africa will be experiencing hot summer weather with some cooler breezes. Saying that there won't be snow in Africa encourages an idea that there'll be minimal crop growth due to scorching weather and climate, which, as shown by the climatic variations on the map, just isn't true. So, why did Bob Geldof write these lyrics, and why do we all wholeheartedly go along with it? Well, it's because I know myself and many other people living in Western countries are guilty of having preconceived notions about Africa, such as that of it having an extremely hot climate. But it is up to us as people with these preconceived notions to change the way we view and talk about Africa. To put things into context of why we tend to view Africa the way we do, the Western perspective of Africa began to be formed when colonial explorers wrote accounts of their time in Africa for the European population to read, often describing it in a harmful and poorly informed way whilst exploiting the local people and land themselves. Take Belgian explorer Henry Morton Stanley, who wrote the book Through the Dark Continent, in which he displayed Africa as a savage place, populated by barbaric tribes and inhospitable land in need of the introduction of Christian values. But in the mid-20th century, a wave of African countries began to gain independence from the colonial era, after being devastated economically by the colonial era and completely exploited of natural resources. Understandably, many of these countries did and still do struggle with political and economic instability. This led to a wave of aid campaigns for Africa beginning in the 1980s, which often used graphic and sensationalized images of impoverished children and communities in order to create sympathy from Western audiences. And despite the good these campaigns have caused for helping to create aid for those who genuinely do need it in African countries, they have contributed to the Western view of Africa today, a suffering, homogenous entity in need of Western intervention. This view has caused harmful consequences and has led to some considerably ridiculous charitable endeavours, such as that of Jason Zook, who decided to ship 1 million t-shirts to Africa with a campaign slogan of "Share your wealth, share your shirts, we're going to change the world." And I think we can probably guess that most Africans don't actually have trouble getting access to t-shirts and might object to the idea that giving them 1 million more is going to change the world. But to be fair to Jason Zook, Westerners have had a homogenous and stereotypical view of Africa shoved down our throats in every possible form of media, from books to films to music, which has skewed our view of what it is really like there. Like, I'm sure many of the Gen Zs and younger millennials in the audience may remember reading the book Handa Surprise in primary school. If you haven't heard of it, this is the story of a little girl named Handa who carries a basket of fruit from her village to her friend's village, but along the way, an array of animals, from elephants to monkeys to ostriches, take the fruit from the basket. This presents an exoticized view of Africa to young children, which they will likely carry with them into the future. However, it is also important to recognize that this book was written in order to diversify the children's books market and did an excellent job of doing so. Despite this, it has still been damaging to the way I, as a child, and many others view Africa. For me, a paradigm shift in my own understanding came when I was 13 and invited to my Nigerian friend's family party. I was immediately exposed to an array of cultural marvels, from incredible food to music to clothing to dances. After this, I started to do my own research into Nigeria just by watching videos on YouTube, and found it was an amazing country filled with a mix of both urban and rural landscapes and filled with incredible music and traditions, and overall just did not match my initial perspective of how I saw Africa. As Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said in her own TED Talk, "If all I knew from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful people, beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves." Thus, it is imperative that we as Western people expose ourselves to as much information about the cultural and geographical nuances that exist within Africa and address our own unconscious prejudices as a continent in order to decolonize our views surrounding Africa. For example, despite the confusion of seemingly many, Africa is not a country, but a continent with 52 countries. It is one of the most culturally diverse continents on Earth, with an estimated 3,000 ethnic groups and up to 2,000 languages and dialects being spoken. From this, an array of different cultures have appeared around Africa, with different music, foods, arts, traditions, and football rivalries arising from this. And although there are many variations that exist between different cultures and nations within Africa, there are some things that are the same between many countries, such as jollof rice, a staple West African dish. Although there are differing recipe variations, and most Nigerians would never be caught eating a bowl of Ghanaian jollof rice and vice versa. Africa is more than just a place on a map. It is a tapestry of diverse cultures, breathtaking landscapes, and vibrant souls. As Westerners, our view of Africa has been skewed, and it is time that a change occurs. In order to break the prejudices that exist within our minds surrounding Africa, I would recommend being open to learning from your African peers, reading books such as Africa is Not a Country by Deepo Faloyin, or just watching some cool documentaries or Nollywood films such as Soul to become more informed on the nuances and cultural richness that exists within Africa. This is something I've begun to do myself, and I promise not only will you find it fascinating, but you can help create a shift in how we talk about Africa in Western countries. And maybe next time someone plays Do They Know It's Christmas, turn it off, for All I Want for Christmas Is You instead. Thank you.